Welcome back to another episode of the Contagious Culture Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle King, and the goal of this podcast is to help you create ecosystems and environments where people thrive. Look, today's guest is first a breath of fresh air, truly a light. Yes, she's a leadership development consultant, speaker, author, and founder of Bravo for You. But Patricia is known for much more. She's known for helping leaders, helping organizations strengthen culture, accelerate growth, and produce measurable business results through empathetic leadership, something that all of us need. A human-centered approach, a human-centered strategy. And she's designed and really delivered programs across the country for Fortune 500 companies, taught leadership and development, leadership and team development at institutions like the University of Washington, UCLA, UC Irvine. And she's built a reputation for not just helping leaders uncover the unseen dynamics that often shape performance, but really establish a culture from beneath the surface. Patricia, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Kyle. Thanks for having me.
Oh, look, I'm excited to get into this conversation. I really am. And before we get into all the deep work that you're doing and all of the questions that I have for you, what's keeping you excited these days? Like, what's getting you excited?
Ooh, I think what I'm really excited about right now is really helping leaders and organizations think about what's happening in the landscape right now. And we know there's a
Mm.
lot of transformation that's going on,
Yep.
and leaders are really wrestling with that. And I think the pace of transformation and adoption is forcing leaders to behave in ways in which they've never had to perhaps behave
That's
before.
good.
And so you're seeing that too.
Yo, definitely,
Yeah.
definitely. And
And
it's interesting that you use the word transformation.
mm,
For listeners listening in, can you define how you see transformation first as you're continuing to communicate?
yeah, I think organizations define it in a lot of different ways. But when I see organizations looking to transform, it's beyond incremental change. So it is something that is really going to add accretive value to an organization. And
Yeah.
so it goes beyond something that might be functional, like small within an organization. It's really touching all aspects of the organization, intended to get the organization to the next level, serving their mission, their value proposition, whatever that might be.
That's interesting. I think a lot of times organizations that I touch base with, we identify getting to the next level only as dollars, only as metrics. But we often forget the one and most important aspect is the people. And with the rise in technology, with the rise in AI and all of these systems and tools to accelerate growth and to be able to allow us to scale our organization, we're
Completely.
forgetting the most important part, and that's our people. So what would you
Yeah.
say to those leaders?
Yeah, I think some of it is happening very unintentionally as a
Mm.
result of the pace that leaders are wrestling with. It's forcing them or reducing them maybe to stay at the surface
That's
when in
good.
fact what's valuable is more depth and understanding what's going on. The other challenge on the flip side is that individuals that are experiencing all this change and transformation that's taking place, and you mentioned the word AI, which comes up in all
Yeah.
the conversations, is that I don't think that everyone has necessarily the acknowledgement or the language for some of the losses that they're experiencing as a result of the pace and the transformation. And I think that's something that both leaders, organizations, and team members are really wrestling with.
What do we do? We recognize the wrestling match is happening. We recognize we're all wanting transformation. We recognize we're wanting change and we're wanting all of these different things, but there's barriers that exist, and there's barriers that, frankly, are always going to exist.
Sure.
What do we do? What would you recommend?
So I like to invite leaders to think about the investments that they're making on the business side of
Mm.
organizations, and encourage them to look at what are the investments that they're making on the people side. And certainly leaders can and sometimes do make an argument that the investments need to differ based on the ROI that they're getting.
Of
Um,
course.
but I would argue that there's an ROI on the people side that
Mhm.
often gets left behind because leaders get so focused on the mission, or again, the value that they're trying to obtain in the organization. And so the people side gets eroded. And one of the things that I find that we continue to see happen over and over again is you do see that you do get an ROI from investing in people. So as an example, we see in organizations those leaders that operate in organizations that are known for being really competitive and fast moving. Leaders adopt a different position sometimes. They say, you know what, I'm going to slow down a little bit. I'm going to operate in contrast to what everybody else is doing. And what team members in those organizations tell me is, I'm interested in working with that leader because they're operating differently. So all of a sudden, the leader is now getting more attention and engagement because they're operating a little bit differently.
Interesting.
And what I think is interesting is sometimes that takes courage from a leader, for sure, to be able to do that. Yeah. The other aspect is that leaders are constantly tasked with the challenge of balancing the business needs or the missions needs with the people needs. And I think one of the ways to really think about keeping that front and center is to look at the ratios. What are the ratios that you're investing in the business versus what are the ratios that you're investing in the people? And when I ask people to track that for a small period of time, all of a sudden the light bulbs go off and they realize, like, oh, we're a little asymmetrical here. And it's normal. I mean, it happens to all organizations, but I think once you start to notice the patterns, you can begin to look at the investments that do get you a return on the people side. So one of the things that I like to talk about a lot is helping leaders and teams understand each other better in the workplace. And what I find that does is it creates relationship shortcuts where leaders can actually save time. And so when I talk to leaders about the concept of saving time, now all of a sudden I've got their attention. Oh, yeah. That's interesting to them, right? Save time, save money. So one of the things you can do through those relationship shortcuts by making just a 10-minute investment in conversations to understand others is to really then shortcut the nature of the conversations that happen within the working relationship. So there creates more relational agility, more trust, and then you save time when you're working together and collaborating. That is part of the ROI. So that's just one example.
What does that look like though in practice? You know, I often try to frame questions and have conversations around the new leader or the leader that is experiencing a lot of friction within their organization and they're wanting transformation, but they have to transition out of the various habits or behaviors or actions that they're currently living by or leading by. So what does that look like practically?
Yeah, practically. Yes, for sure. Change is difficult for all of us. We're humans. We like continuity and what feels, comfortable for us. And so leaders, I see leaders take two approaches. One is they get very intentionally focused on making change. For example, I had one leader I worked with who knew that he needed to be more intentional in the human conversations and take his business hat off. And look, here's what we ask leaders to do. We ask leaders to turn around businesses, to drive profit and revenue, to, do more business development for their nonprofit, right? To retain the best talent, to hire even more, great talent. Yeah. And we don't say to them, could you actually engage in understanding others? That's not measured anywhere in organizations. Exactly. And so, but some leaders that recognize the value, they realize that they have to take that hat off that they're normally getting rewarded for and be really focused and present with the people that are right in front of them. So I had one leader that would say to me when he was physically in the office, he would literally pinch himself on his hand to remind himself as he was getting ready to go into a one-on-one that was his sign to switch his hat into and in front of this person, because otherwise he was running, very frenetically in the organization, doing all the things that needed to get done, which is exactly what's being rewarded in the organization. So some leaders are really intentionally focused. Some leaders struggle a little bit more in those situations. Maybe they're not naturally wired towards having those conversations. Maybe their job requires that they're constantly intellectually in their head. And so with those leaders, I usually like to invite them to experiment a little bit with the lenses that work within how they shape their own leadership. Because one of the things that I find leaders are really resistant to is some prescriptive set of steps that they need to adopt. And
Yeah.
so if I offer them some ways in which they can experiment to see what works for them within the context of their culture, their organization, and their teams, then they start to find the ways in which they can engage with people in a little bit of a different way than perhaps they have been. But it's through their experimentation versus somebody telling them exactly what they need to do.
No, that's great. That's such a great perspective. And you mentioned something earlier in regards to the intersection between ROI and growing our business and systems and infrastructure versus the ROI and investing in our people. And I guess my lens and my perspective on that is the best investment for your business is always in investing in your people.
Mm-hmm.
Like your people have the greatest ROI, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I love about your work is you create very insightful perspectives regarding empathetic leadership. In my opinion, a lot of those conversations that I'm still having, even in 2026, a lot of people still hear the word empathy and think it sounds soft in a
Too
sense.
soft. Yeah.
Why
Yeah.
do you believe that is such a dangerous misconception and misunderstanding?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that still is the case. And I think um, because we haven't attached enough of the business language to what empathy is actually about.
Mm,
So when I talk to people, I mean, the definition that I use is that empathy in leadership is about accurately identifying cues and clues to
mm,
activate. And so empathy is about understanding, and
right.
understanding is neutral.
That's good.
I was just having a conversation with somebody about this the other day because they were telling me that, they were asking, can you over empathize, Patricia? And I said, I actually don't think you can over empathize. I don't think you can ever understand too
Mm,
much about somebody. What you
really?
can do is you can over index in your response.
Tell me more.
Well, I think, and that's where leaders, I think, get caught up. I think leaders often feel like if I empathize, if I go and I understand what's going on with my team members, I now am going to feel like I have to capitulate to whatever their requests are, what they want to see happen, when actually that's not true at all. A leader can still make their business decision based on facts and data that they would normally make. They just now have a human data that they can incorporate into their business decision. And there's nothing wrong with maintaining accountability and performance standards and whatever business needs are
Yeah.
necessary. And so that means that in some cases you might have to push back on somebody, but with the understanding that you have, you can then be so much more effective in your communication
Mm,
back to that individual if you need to deliver news that maybe they were not excited about, or that's not going to land as well as perhaps what they wanted. And I think that part is really important, is to help leaders think about understanding, being neutral, and helping them gather information that then helps them make more effective decisions. And so I think that helps leaders kind of shift away from this idea that it's soft. It's actually informing their decision making. I
You know,
might add, oh, go ahead.
no, I appreciate that perspective, because even in my own leadership early on, I used to always say that we're making data-driven decisions. And
Mm-hmm.
I was so uninformed on what
Mm-hmm.
it meant and how we practically implemented that within our day-to-day. And
Yeah.
you just really unpacked something for me and revealed something for me, that human perspective is data too.
Yes.
And having these conversations, going on this listening tour, and considering the thoughts, the perspectives, and the ideas of your team members and your colleagues also presents another piece of data that
Right.
can allow us to be able to still make data-driven decisions.
Yeah.
But I think that brings up a question: how do leaders, though, balance empathy with accountability and standards and decision making? Like, what does that look like for that leader that's listening in?
Yeah. So one of the phrases that I often repeat to leaders frequently is, empathy is about understanding, and understanding does not equal agreement.
Mm,
And so when I'm looking at
right.
leaders face to face, I can see their shoulders go down when I say that, because that's helping them think about, okay, I don't need to agree with what this person is saying. I'm just getting data and information. And now I can make the right business decisions. And so the right business decision might be to hold somebody accountable. It might be to maintain some really rigorous high performance standards, or even raise the bar that
Yeah.
is necessary. And so it's up to that leader then to your point, take that data and use that data to inform the decision that they are actually going to make. And that decision might be to raise a performance standard, to hold someone accountable. What they benefit from is having knowledge of where the other person is. They
Yeah.
understand where the other person's coming from. Maybe I'll just make up an example. Maybe somebody's pitching an idea for a project, and it's a new innovative idea. And the leader has a lot of reasons and data why perhaps that idea might not be the most effective solution. And so they know they're going to let the person down when they say, we're probably not going to move forward with this.
No.
And that might be a very appropriate business decision, but they know the person's going to be disappointed. And so they can then use that to inform the communication with the person to let them know, what was valuable about that idea. And then here are all the reasons why we're not going to be able to move forward with it. So the person then gets a congruent response as opposed to, no, that's not going to work out.
What I hear, Patricia, is organizational culture at its finest. You mentioned words such as standards. You mentioned words in regards to transformation, transition, raising the bar in how we communicate, how we listen, and how we approach this work. How can leaders, though, create these types of cultures where people feel heard, listened to, and supported, while still balancing them being challenged and driven towards being successful in their roles?
Sure. Yeah. So I think we hear a lot that culture starts at the top. And I think there's definitely some truth to that. I don't think it solely can come from the top. I think culture is embedded across organizations. And there are some leaders that, like I mentioned earlier, they get really courageous and they're going to create a culture within their organization where they have responsibility and accountability. So it is possible to create that even when the broader organization is not necessarily fully aligned to where a leader's perspective is. It can definitely be a little bit of a dance, but I think that leaders who care about creating a conversation with people do that through invitation. I think also leaders can create a culture where, to your point, more listening is happening, more engagement, more two-way interactive dialogue is happening. With a concept that I like to call professional intimacy, which is learning a lot about people. Again, it's professional. And what I think that does is it allows you to deepen conversations and knowledge of people, which creates environments where there is more understanding. A leader then begins to understand, what are people's preferences? How do they prefer to communicate? What do they want to, talk about in the workplace? What are some things that are maybe off limits for them? Once you know a lot of those things, you can actually deepen the conversations professionally in a way that's effective for the team and the work that they're doing. And so as you start to do that, you're essentially creating more comfortable and safer environments where people are willing to share more and volunteer more. And this is where I kind of come back to the ROI. Some of the ROI that you then start to see is voluntary effort. Have you heard the term discretionary effort?
That's good. Yes, I have.
So I think that's another place where leaders get a return on their investment. If you invest in developing some professional intimacy and people start to feel really comfortable in their roles, comfortable that they can offer perspectives where they're in agreement, offer perspective, to show another side or another angle, and they know the ways in which those are accepted and respected in the organization, then what you see is people willing to give more than is expected. And so that doesn't happen by just raising performance standards and expectations. It happens because you offered people the opportunity to voluntarily step in and offer more. And I think that's often an underutilized approach in organizations that is a win-win for everybody involved.
Anybody listening right now, this is the blueprint for how we as leaders need to listen better, more intentionally, how we have to establish spaces that we can create professional intimacy. We have to understand that the human perspective, knowledge, and ideologies are also a part of the data that can actually drive decisions that can lead to more productivity and a higher return on the investment. But we have to consider the people. Patricia, you've written a lot and very thoughtfully about grief, about tension, and about a lot of the emotional realities that oftentimes come up at work.
Mhm.
A lot of companies are still struggling, especially now with making room for humanity.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? And what are some things that we can do organizationally to be able to shift that narrative?
Sure. I think, another overused term. I mean, we're seeing so much disruption, which I think is true,
Yeah.
right? That we haven't experienced to this degree and at this level, and organizations are no different. And I think what is challenging is that with the disruption coming at the pace and scope in which it's coming, organizations are feeling the pressure of multiple priorities. They've never had so many
Of course.
priorities. Always been a challenge. And so I think what's difficult is then how, especially for leaders who find themselves right in the center of all
Yeah.
this, to then figure out how they're going to move forward while also supporting their teams.
Mhm.
But where that becomes really challenging is when people start to get left behind.
Mm.
And you mentioned grief, and I think one of the things that's happening is we are seeing a lot of loss in the workplace,
Yeah.
and a lack of a language for loss or acknowledgement for it in the workplace.
Can you define that loss, what that looks like, and provide language for us?
Yeah, so it's such a big word, because loss can be, somebody in my organization got laid off, and I just lost my favorite teammate. Like literally, they're gone. But they can also be like micro losses that start to add up for people and accumulate to more of a sense of loss and even grief. Like, oh, I used to do my job with this team. I love working with that team. Or I used to get to work a lot on the computer and I love to, jump into the data and do data analysis. And now I'm finding myself in team meetings, 24/7. Or I like to work with people in the office and now I'm finding myself operating digitally. There's even some micro losses that sometimes we don't recognize start to add up and create, some challenges for people organizationally. And I think those human dynamics are being recognized less and less because of the pace right now, because of the disruption. And so people are feeling left behind. And when people feel left behind, they either scramble and struggle to keep up or they
Yeah.
get more engaged. So then that starts to create more tension in organizations, which becomes expensive. That lack of attention on human dynamics ultimately becomes expensive.
Agreed. Patricia, I'm interested. Like, why this work? You have had a very extensive career, a lot of variety in the roles and even the titles that you've assumed. Why this work and why now?
I think, it's always been interesting to me. I think there is so much to be had in the power of understanding others. But I
Yeah.
think right now, what's lacking is interpretation
Mm.
and meaning making for people because of the disruption and of the pace. And so I think when those dynamics start to really surface and remain unaddressed, I think it's costing people and it's costing organizations. So if we attack both of those, you're going to find more engaged talent and you're going to find organizations that are not losing some of those costs that I think are hidden because they're so focused on some of the other priorities that are shaping their day to day.
What do you wish organizations understood more about people in general?
I mean, the first one that comes up for me is that people are nuanced. So it's
Yeah.
sometimes it takes a bit of an investment to understand the nuances in others. And
Yeah.
it's really easy to jump to categorize, or I'll just say judge people. Uh,
Perspective. Yeah.
so I think empathy competes with judgment.
Mm.
I think it's a human condition that we judge, like we all get in that trap. I fall into it.
Yeah.
But I think if you have something that helps moderate that, you can unpack getting too far into that trap.
That's good. What is, as you're doing this work, leading this work, and as leaders are listening in, what is one question that a leader should ask themselves more often to be more reflective, be more empathetic, be more intentional with leading this work on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I think what is the people ROI today or this week or this
That's
month?
good. That's good. You know, Patricia, I'm excited. I'm excited for everybody that's listening in. I'm excited for the change that is going to shift and shape up once people are able to implement these specific actions. If you were to give leaders 2 to 3 steps for them to really become doers of empathetic leadership, what would those steps be after this call, after they listen into this podcast episode? What would you be requiring people to do?
Yeah, the first one is experiment. So first, think about, how frequently in your day do you go about working to understand others? So it's that ratio between, well, how much are you just focused on the work versus your understanding others? So identify what that
Mm,
ratio is for yourself. If it's a little asymmetrical, think about where you want to elevate that.
yeah.
But then go and experiment. So experiment with understanding others in your organization. And by the way, that can happen in person, virtually. It's really about identifying more information that you want to know about somebody, again, in a professional manner. It can be about them as humans, it can be about the work, but really tune in to understand their experiences, their preferences, and get a little bit more information and think about it as data.
Yeah.
So I really liked how we made that connection earlier. So I think that's maybe the last step, is think about what you're learning from others is human data, and it's really valuable to your business.
I love that. Patricia, where can we find you online and how can we continue to support not only you, but then this work that you're doing as well?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'm pretty present on LinkedIn, so you can find me there under Patricia Bravo, and then my website is bravoforyou.com, bravoforyu.com.
Patricia, this has been phenomenal. I appreciate you giving your heart, giving your time, giving your wisdom. And I'm super excited for me even to understand how to implement these perspectives, these practices day to day within my organization, within the organizations that we lead with, that we support as well. Anybody listening, I want you to follow Patricia on all of those platforms. I want you to send her flowers, give her a big virtual hug on these platforms as well. And one of the questions that we always ask on the Contagious Culture podcast is, what type of culture are you spreading? The
Mm.
energy you bring is the culture you create. Go make yours worth catching. It's another episode of the Contagious Culture Podcast with Kyle King and Patricia Bravo. We'll see you guys next episode.